Hello everyone. I, Chaitanya Sinha, Assistant Professor of Arihant College of Education, has come up with another video which is related to our course Introduction to Educational Research, where we are going to discuss about variables in research. Let's see first what variables are actually. Variables are, we all know that anything which differs in value or any entity that take different values in different time. Anything that can vary will be considered as variables. For instance, age can be considered as variable because age can take different values for different people or for same person at different time. So the age varies in a population. There can be variance in the age of different individuals, or the same individual varies in age in different passing years of their life. So age can be considered as a variable. As we all know, in mathematics we use x, y, a, b, these kind of terms for variable, and the opposite of variable is constant. So constants like pi, the values which are very specific. Same way, there are certain values which keeps on varying, it changes as required. They are known as variables. Similarly, another example we can say, country can be considered as a variable because a person's country can be assigned a value. Anything that has a quantity or quality that varies is known as variable. And as a researcher, we are going to manipulate the variable to see what happened to another variable. So usually in research, variables are a very important factor where we see that one variable is changed or manipulated to affect the other variables, and we try to find out the correlation between the variables. Now we will discuss about the types of variable. So among all types of variable, the first one is independent variable. Independent variable is also known as experimental variable, manipulated variable, or treatment variable. So why the name has come in that way, you will understand. The factor which is measured, manipulated, or selected by the experimenter to determine its relationship to an observed phenomenon is known as dependent variable. So what the researcher does or experimenter does with this type of variable is that they change it, they manipulate it, and they use this manipulated or changed variable to observe that what kind of effect it is causing on some other factors or on some phenomena. So they manipulate it and also they change it as per their requirement or whatever they want in that. So they changed it, and also it is used for experimentation. That's why these names have come, because independent variable are used in experimental researches. They are manipulated or they are changed to see their effect on other variables or other phenomena or other factors. Also, the sample is being treated using the independent variable. So that's why it is also named as treatment variable. In a research study, independent variable is the precursor condition that are presumed to affect the dependent variable. What happens in research, that the researcher always has an idea that if something gonna change, it will affect some other factor in the working system. So what he does, he changes that factor which can affect changes in other factor. So he already has this notion that what can change or what is the major factor that is changing the other things. So he picks up that factor and then he manipulates it. And when he manipulates it and uses it in his research, it becomes his independent variable. So what we have seen here, what we can see, that the researcher already has an idea that this factor is having some kind of effect on the other factor, and then he makes some kind of changes in that factor. Okay, so he has this pre-notion, he has this pre-idea. That's why independent variables are the precursor condition, that it starts the research, and it is the factor which has some kind of effect on the variable, dependent variable. So if we can change that independent variable, we can have some modification in dependent variable also. That is already being somewhat understood by the researcher. That's why it is known as precursor condition. They are either manipulated by the researcher or are observed by the researcher so that their value can be related to the dependent variable. What the researcher does with independent variable, that he changes it, he manipulates it, and he uses it as he wants on the dependent, to see the effect on dependent variable. So he is manipulating the independent variable and he wants to see the relation of dependent variable, how much the dependent variable changes according to the independent variable. He tries to understand it, he tries to learn it, tries to observe it. And sometimes when there are some new things happening, at that time the researcher only observes that what are the different factors which are resulting into changes in some conditions. So at that time only observation of the independent variable is done, so that they can find out the relation between independent variable and the dependent variable. So the independent variables are manipulated so that we can understand the effect of independent variable on the outcome of an experiment. So the outcome of experiment actually tells us about how the dependent variable changes by implementing or by treatment of the sample with independent variable. So we can understand that what kind of outcome we'll have, or what is the outcome of the experiment when we manipulate the independent variable. In a research study, the independent variable defines the principal focus of the research interest. So it is the basic or the principal focus of research. So the researcher puts his heart and soul to manipulate, to change the independent variable very logically with some kind of theoretical basis, so that he can get some kind of changes in the dependent variable. So it is the central part of the research. Independent variable is the central part of the research, which is very important. If it is not being done properly, or if it is not being used in a proper way, in that case the results of the research will not be valid, or it is not going to have a proper result for the research. Let's see. The next type of variable is dependent variable. Dependent variable is also known as outcome variable. It is also known as criterion variable and also response variable. So variables which are being influenced by the dependent variable, and they are observed and measured so that the researcher can understand what kind of effect independent variables are having on this factor, is known as dependent variables. The dependent variables are observed and measured by the researcher. So the researcher measure the independent variable to understand what kind of effect independent variable is having on the dependent variable. The experimental changes the independent variable, but he measures dependent variable. That is an important thing to remember. It is being measured to determine the effect of independent variable. As I already told, that independent variable is manipulated. It is used to treat the sample, and to understand what kind of effect this independent variable is having, the changes or the manipulated independent variables are having, is being ascertained by measuring the dependent variable, because this dependent variable is being changed by the treatment variable or independent variable. It is also influenced by the treatment variable. I told you all already that treatment variable changes the dependent variable. The third type of variable is extraneous variable. Extraneous variables are those variables, if we cannot control them, in that case they may surely change the dependent variable. So there can be some changes due to those factors if they are not removed. So these variables should be controlled so that the researcher get proper result, where he can understand that what kind of changes are happening in dependent variable due to independent variable. So the extraneous variables has the capacity to change the dependent variable, to have the capacity to bring changes in the dependent variable, and it is separated or different than independent variable. So the researcher always wants to ensure that whenever he is doing the research, the changes must be due to independent variable, and extraneous variable should have minimal effect on the dependent variable. Then his results will be very appropriate. So all these variables which are different or which are not independent variables, but they have a profound effect on the experiment, are known as extraneous variable. They are also known as confounding variables. If they cannot be controlled, in that case they can give erroneous results. But in that case also, we can understand and provide alternative explanation of the research. So there can be certain things which can be explained using extraneous variable apart from independent variable. So usually extraneous variable should be controlled as much as possible, so that the effects on variable independent is due to independent variables only. But in some cases when we cannot control the extraneous variables, in that case we may get some alternative explanation of the effects on dependent variable apart from independent variable as well. The last type of variable is controlled variables. Controlled variables are the variables which the researcher wants to control. It is also known as constant variable, or simply it is called as control. It is not the part of the experiment, but it is very important because it has some kind of effect on the result. So controlled variable, the variables which needs to be controlled, otherwise they can affect the result of the research, are known as controlled variable. We have to remember that control variable are not as same as control group. Control variable are completely different than control group. So in an experiment, there are several number of control variables. It is also very important for the researcher that he controls, or the variables remain constant apart from independent variables. So extraneous variables also can be considered as controlled variable if we can control them. So they are the controlled variables has the capacity to affect the result of the experiment. So if a control variable changes during the experiment, it may differentiate, or it may cause some kind of error in finding the correlation between the dependent and independent variable. So whenever possible, control variable must be identified, measured and recorded beforehand, and it should be kept as it is throughout the experiment. Otherwise, it may affect the relationship between the independent and dependent variable. So that's all related to different types of variables. I hope you all have understood this concept. If you like it, do share the video and help others. Happy learning. Thank you so much.